Good evening, and welcome to Reverend Sherri's oh gosh, I'm going clearly cut. Good evening, and welcome to Reverend Sherri's online Metaphysical Bible Hangout. This Bible experience is an extension of Understanding Principles for Better Living Church, where the Reverend Dr. Delary Slett is the minister and the founder. Up Church is a Bible-based New Thought Christian church, and if you're in the Los Angeles area, we would love for you to join us. Our services are held Sundays at 1 o'clock at 600 West Queen Street in Inglewood, California. I am Reverend Sherri James, and I am the assistant minister at Up Church. So a couple of brief announcements, and then we'll dive right in. First, every Saturday, Reverend Sherri Thompson hosts the Spiritual Weight Loss radio broadcast, and you can tune in at 9 a.m. at blogtalkradio.com/Sherri Speaks, or you can dial in at area code 347-826-9368. Now, something I'm excited about. Today marks the beginning of open enrollment for my new course, Jumpstart, Wake Up the Passion That Fuels Your Life Purpose. I am so excited about this teleclass. All of the elements you love, plus some of the things that my team and I have been dreaming up, everything in creation has a purpose. Right? So for you not to have a purpose would mean that you're the one element in all of creation that functions outside of spiritual law and order. So the only way to live your purpose is to know your purpose. And so that's the reason that I created this course. It's called Jumpstart, Wake Up the Passion That Fuels Your Life Purpose. A lot of you out there, you know your life purpose. You know what your life is about, but maybe you're not taking the kind of action that you would really like to that you'd really like to take. Or maybe you're new to this whole life purpose thing and a little bit skeptical, like, okay, yeah, here we go, woo, 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 life purpose. But remember, everything in creation functions according to a purpose. Everything. The trees have a purpose. The sun has a purpose. The stars have a purpose. And it all works together in a symbiotic relationship. So for you not to have a purpose, it would mean that you'd be the one outlier that doesn't function according to spiritual law. So since that's the case, come on and get in the class. Let's start to explore this. What is your purpose? Why are you here? Why on earth are you here? Open enrollment starts today. You can sign up at revsherri.com, and open enrollment closes Friday, September 5th. So this will be a closed group of people that I will work with. It's a 21-day teleclass, and you can get more information on my website about how that works, but it's a daily teleclass, so we're going to dial in to a conference call line every day. If you are out of the country, meaning you're outside of the U.S., there are actually conference call lines that you can dial into so that it will not be an international phone call for you. So if you want that information, I'll provide that for you as well. But definitely you want to join me. Let's go. Let's have some fun. Let's really, really have some fun, because life is wonderful when you are living your purpose. If you are listening live and you want to be a part of the film strip, and I'm so shocked that I have like nobody in the film strip today, but who knows what's going on. So the film strip is like down here, like you see the faces that are normally down at the bottom. So that's the film strip. So if you want to be a part of that, just send me a message in the Q&A, and I'll send you the link for you to come right on into the film strip. If you are watching this broadcast later on YouTube, you can leave your questions below, and I will be happy to answer them. And I'm pretty good. I usually get back to people within 24 to 48 hours at the latest. Now, our new series starts today. Yay! So this is the Apostle Paul, a man with a mission, a life lived on purpose. So we're going to be looking at what was this man all about? Why was he so possessed, if you will, with spreading the gospel, with spreading the good news? What did he know? And what messages does he have for us here in the 21st century? So I'm really excited about that. And finally, if you like this broadcast, please subscribe so you can be notified of other videos that I post, plus other classes that I'm offering, retreats. I mean, I've got some great stuff lined up, and I'm really just getting going. So, subscribe, join me, hang out with me, come to the Bible Hangout on Thursday nights, and then join me for some of the fun stuff that I've got going on. Now, this journey is rooted in Scripture. And the scripture for this journey, you'll notice that it's a different one, is Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds, so that you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And so we're just going to open the class in prayer, and if you would just become still right where you are. And just rest fully in this one moment. This is the only time that there is. The past is gone. It is no more. The future is not yet birth, so it does not belong to us. But what we do have is this moment right now. And inside this moment right now, we have all the power that we need. We have all the love that we need. We have all the joy that we need. We have all the peace that we need. And we just ask that we really, really, really be transformed by the study of Paul. We're asking for a new understanding of who we are. Reveal to us a little bit more deeply our divinity. Help us to really live what it means to be a mystic, what it means to be a student of the Christ, what it means to be a spiritual being. I know that every word that I pray is heard and answered. And so I just release this prayer now in the name and the nature of the one that is called the Christ. I let it be so. And so it is. All right. So we've got some exciting things happening this evening. I am going to get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is, oh, look at there. Somebody said they didn't get the invitation. I'm going to take a second to invite a couple people in. Not sure what's going on there. But let's get going. All right. Hey, guys, I sent you guys the invitation. We'll try that one more time. Okay. All right. Good to see you guys. All right, so Paul, so the first thing I want to go through is the syllabus. So everything is up on my website. If you just go to revsherri.com, the main page, you will get all the information. There's actually a simulcast broadcast there, but I'm going to share my screen with you so that you can, so we can walk through the outline together. All right, so let's make this bigger because no one can see in tiny print. So I'm trusting that you guys can see this clearly. Yeah, it looks clear on my screen. If it's not, just holler or something and tell me. You know, I'll fix it. All right. So with this, hold on, I'm in the wrong screen. With this, this series is going to take us right until the Thursday before Thanksgiving. A couple of things that you're going to need. All of them are available online for free. The first is the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. Now, here's the thing. I love this dictionary. Where's my copy? It's laying around here somewhere. Oh, here it is. So this is an awesome, awesome book to have in your library. And so I highly recommend it. But if you might be working on a budget, right? So if you're working on a budget, then you can actually go to truthunity.net. And Mark Hicks, who created Truth Unity, has this amazing resource. It's online. It's available for free. I encourage you to avail yourselves of it. Definitely make a donation to his ministry because he has done this incredible work and he is making it available to the public for free. And I really love what he's got going on there. So you can go to truthunity.net. You can get the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. You can get the Revealing Word. And then here's the great part. They're hyperlinked, meaning that you can go anywhere in Scripture and it's hyperlinked to the word, to the definition in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary. So it makes studying just absolutely amazing. Now, also, you're going to need chapters 3 through 8 of Be Ye Transformed. This is a book by Elizabeth Sand Turner, and she did an incredible trilogy on the metaphysics in the Bible, and she used most of all of Fillmore's work to help flesh out her interpretation. You can find a free copy of this at tsmj.org, all of that. If you just click on that link, it'll take you right there. And then you want to have a journal. And the journal is important because as you are moving through your spiritual development, you're getting all kinds of insights, you're getting all kinds of really good information, and you want to be able to jot that down. You want to be staying aware of the little subtle minute ways that spirit is revealing itself to you. And so you want to make note of the things that you are realizing. This is so important to just, even after we finish the class today, to just take a few minutes and just, you know, jot something down, something you heard differently, or maybe an aha moment. Maybe it wasn't necessarily something from the class, but something you heard spark something else. Well, you want to write that information down. This is the spirit speaking to you. You are a mystic. You are have a direct connection to spirit. And so the Spirit of God is speaking in you all the time. Part of the writing down process is that you're training your ears to hear. This is what the writing down process does. It's not that, oh, I just need to record it. It's that what you're doing is that you're training the mind to listen for what the Spirit is saying. And what will happen is that the more you write something down, the more stuff you'll have to write down, because you're training your mind to listen training your inner ear to perk up and listen to the leanings of the Spirit. Now, today we're just going to go into who is Paul. Next week we're going to look at the case for metaphysics and like why. Well, you'll see today when we start talking about some of the problems that come up with the documents that we have. And then on September 4th, we'll get into the case for metaphysics, and then we're just going to work through Elizabeth Sand-Turner's books, and you'll see that there is a Bible reading, and then there's also the reading in the text. And you can follow right along. I'm going to stick to this outline. I don't expect to really sort of fall off this outline. There are no breaks in the outline, although I will tell you that this particular Thursday, October 2nd, I will actually be broadcasting from St. Simons, Georgia. I am actually going to be doing the women's retreat for Universal Truth Center, and so I will be broadcasting remote. So I am trusting that there is some Wi-Fi, or else I'll have a stick, or we'll be doing this on my iPad. But we will definitely have class that week, so you don't have to worry about that. But I'll be in St. Simons, Georgia that weekend. So trusting that everything will work out fine. Hey, you know what I'm going to do, guys? I'm going to put this invitation. No, that's not how I'm going to do it. I'm going to put this on the Google Plus event page because I'd love for you guys to sit in live with me. So here's the link. You just click on that link. That should take you into the film strip. Where'd it go? Well, it's there. Okay. All right. So then the next piece is that I created a PDF of the Elizabeth Sand-Turner text, and that's available on my website. So if you go to revsherri.com, right there on the main page, you will see a link to get to the information. And so this is the text. I literally just copied it from that link that I showed you in the syllabus. I just copied it, and then right here is everything that we're going to go through. And then you see the page numbers. So whenever I'm referring to the page numbers, I'm not referring to the page number of this PDF. I'm referring to the page number for Elizabeth Sand-Turner. So these are numbered according to her pages. So when you see page 48 to whatever that first one is, 48 to 63, then what you're going to be looking at is reading from page, let me get back up here to the top, from page 48 down to page 63. Okay. All right. Wonderful. Okay. So on my site, I should give you guys that. I think, oh, no, I closed that down. All right, so let's just jump right into who is Paul. Paul is really an important guy. We all know that for a few reasons. One is that more of the New Testament, more than anybody else, he is responsible for probably fully half of the texts that we have. Hey there, Ja. He's responsible for fully half of the text that we have in our Christian scriptures. So what he believes, what he felt, is so much a part of how we think about Christianity, decide what Christianity is. But here's the challenge with that. The letter, he never sits down and does like a treatise on this is what Christianity is. Well, first of all, he didn't really found Christianity. He, like Jesus, was born a Jew, lived a Jew, and died a Jew. He saw himself as being a part of a movement inside Judaism, but he was not necessarily founding Christianity. In fact, the word Christianity only appears, I think, 3 times in the Christian scriptures. And just a little note, you'll hear me refer to the New Testament as the Christian scriptures for a few reasons. One, because to call the Old Testament old, you have to remember this is still somebody else's Bible, meaning the Torah there's nothing old about it to Jews. So to be respectful of everyone's faith, you'll hear me refer to what we have traditionally called the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures. And you'll hear me speak of what we have traditionally called the New Testament, the Christian scriptures. Because this is one of the things that is key in New Thought, is that all paths lead to God. Whatever path that you are on, this is the route that you are taking to get to the God presence inside of you. And so it is neither old nor less than nor worse than what I am doing. It is simply different. So I want to just kind of make that distinction. And I do want to tell you, Bright, I see your questions, and I will get to them. So I just want you to know that I'm not missing the questions that you have there. So a couple of things about Paul is that he is probably one of the challenges with his writing is that he never sits down and says, here's what this movement is all about. Probably the closest thing that we have to that is in Romans, where he has, in the letter to the Romans, he has actually said, these are the things that I believe, right? And these are the things that make up what I'm teaching about spirituality. But the challenge with the other letters is that they are written in response to something that's happening in the churches that he founded. So when we're reading it like, this is what he meant, this is the doctrine, and this is what we should be doing. But that's not really what the letter was written for. It was more like, for example, I can use my church. In my church, one of the things that we are challenged with is fundraising, and and teaching tithing and developing a tithing body. And so we're challenged financially in terms of it's always working out, but it's always working out by the skin of your teeth. And so we're recognizing that there's some work that we need to do in order to improve as an organization, just in terms of how we handle finances, in terms of how we fundraise, just in terms of how we handle the business of doing church, right? So let's say that the president of the Universal Foundation for Better Living, which is our spiritual covering, her name is the Reverend Burnett Jones. And let's say Reverend Burnett Jones writes a letter to Reverend Della. And she says, Dear Reverend Della, be it known, here's what I think. When you handle money, here's what your people need to do. But it's addressing a specific issue. That's what's happening in nearly every letter that Paul writes. So it's not really it doesn't really represent the fullness of what he believed spiritually. It was written to address some things that were happening in those specific churches. Only when you get to the letter to the Romans do you actually have what feels like a doctrinal statement of here is what we believe. The other problem is with acts, A-C-T-S, act. All right. Clearly, I have to work on a little bit of enunciation. So here's the thing, and just so you know, this is one of the texts that I'm using. You can add this to your library, you cannot, but this will be for the scholarship for a lot of the information. I'm working with Bart Ehrman's The New Testament, and I'm also working with Marcus Borg's Reading the Bible Again for the First Time. Both of them are excellent texts. You can definitely get them and add them to your library, and you will not be disappointed. So here's one of the things that is a problem with studying Paul. It is that what I just said, which is that the letters are written on occasion, like they are written to address a specific problem within a specific church. The second thing is who wrote the letters, right? There are 7 letters that are considered undisputed because they are, Paul says that he, wrote them. And this is the letter to the Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1st Thessalonians, and Philemon. So those are the 7 that we know pretty much without question that they were definitely letters that he wrote for a few reasons. One, they're written inside of his lifetime. So when scholars are dating letters, they're looking at a number of things, and I didn't even know this. So they're looking at handwriting, and I didn't realize this, but you guys will understand this for sure because we're moving into an age where penmanship is not as valued. So they'll look at handwriting, and over time, handwriting evolves. And so there are things that people do in handwriting in, say, the 20th century that they don't do in the 21st century. And so if you are studying and trying to date a document, you can look at how the writing has changed. We know now they do this in scholarship, and you leave probably about a 75 to 100-year window in terms of like when you can date something. Right? We know this because if you think about our society today, and my best friend has a 11-year-old. He's about to be 12. He'll be 12 on October 1st. So shout out to Amiri for his 12th birthday. That they don't even teach handwriting in school anymore, and they don't. And specifically, they don't teach cursive writing in school anymore. Now, I don't know. I know this dates me, but I remember when they used to like teach us like you had those big letters. Remember there were the lines, and then there was a dotted line in there, and then you had to write, and you had to make sure that like the top of the letter touched the top of the line, and the bottom of the letter touched the bottom of the line, and then when you were doing the lowercase, it fit in the lower half of it. Remember that? Nobody, just me. Okay, got it. I'm the only one that's not a millennial. The rest of y'all are millennials. So, the thing is that, thank you, Alita. Alita says, how will they sign their names? Alita, I have no idea how they're going to sign their names. So, but if you were studying handwriting, you were dating documents, you would be able to see this marked difference between documents, say up to 2000, and then 2000 and beyond, it's gonna look different because people just don't write as much. So that's one of the ways that scholars are able to date documents, that they're able to see these variations in the writing, and then they know that, okay, we're talking about a different era because this group of letters, which reflect the ways that people were writing in this period of time. So that's one of the ways. The other way is by the things that they address. So, for example, the reason that we know that the Gospels are not eyewitness accounts is because they address things that physically happen after the execution of Jesus. So the fall of the temple to the Romans, which was devastating because this was where I mean, there was no such thing as worship in your home. You went to the temple to worship God. And the Romans destroyed the temple in 70 CE, right? And that is fully 40 years after the execution of Jesus. So for the gospel writers to have written about it, that meant that the documents had to have been written after the fall of the temple. Does that make sense? So these are the ways that scholars date letters. Besides, and let me back up. Here's the other piece. They're dated that way also because there are no original documents for any of them. For any of our New Testament, we have 0 original documents. None. Okay. Everything that we have is a copy that dates to the late 1st century. And then they're not even like full documents. They're like parts of documents. Like they'll find a parchment that'll be like, yay big and yay wide, and there'll be text on both sides, right? So they'll be able to say, okay, if this is where the text is on this side, and this is where we get to on the other side, that they can write a formula that guesses how many words have to be on a page on this side in order for when they get to the reverse side for that text to appear right where it appeared. There are some people who this is how they make their living, so go figure. All right. So with Paul, there are 3 letters that they consider deuteropaul, meaning that it is the authors claim Pauline authorship, but it is almost certain, and most scholars believe, that they are not written by Paul. And that is Ephesians, Colossians, and 2 Thessalonians. Ephesians, Colossians, and 2 Thessalonians. Now, there are also 3 other letters that they know for certain were not written by Paul. And these they call the pastoral epistles. And that is 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus. So this is one of the problems with studying Paul. His letters are written to address a specific need, not necessarily to communicate a doctrinal position. The authenticity of the letters, we know for certain that there are 7 of them that definitely belong to Paul, but there are 6 others that are a problem, right? The other problem that we have is Acts, A-C-T-S, Acts, the book of Acts, okay? So here's the problem with the book of Acts. Every place where there is overlap between what Luke, the writer of Acts is Luke, and Luke also wrote the gospel according to Luke, okay? So every place where Acts and anything from Paul overlaps, meaning that Luke talks about it in the book of Acts and Paul writes about it in one of his letters. In every place, virtually, where this overlap happens, there is discrepancy. So, for example, those of you that have your Bibles, if you go to Acts 17, chapter 17 in Acts, verses 10 through 15. Acts 17, 10 through 15. Right? So what's happening is that there's this story of Paul and Silas in Berea. And what it says in Acts is that Paul went to Athens and he left Timothy. Oh, all right. I got too close to the screen. Sorry about that blurriness. Paul went to Athens and he left Timothy and Silas behind in Berea. And then he didn't meet up again with them until he left Athens and arrived in Corinth. And that happens in Acts chapter 18, verse 5. But in 1 Thessalonians, Paul tells us his version of it. And he is very clear that he did not leave them. So that's kind of like a minor thing, right? Did he leave them in Athens? Did he not leave them in Athens? But then there are other things where there are bigger discrepancies. For example, in the letter to the Galatians, Paul is very clear that he did not go to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles. He's very clear about that. And for a few reasons, that one of the things that he is constantly arguing is his authority to teach the gospel, right? So he is very clear in Galatians that he did not go to Jerusalem to consult with the apostles. And so for a few reasons, because what Paul is saying is that I'm not giving you what I got from somebody else. I'm giving you what I got from God directly. All right. But in Acts, Luke is very clear that he did go. So who do you believe? Right? Is Luke the one that's telling the correct story, or is Paul the one that's telling the correct story? And so this is the problem that we have. So what happens is that when there's not an overlap, when there's something that Luke reports in Acts that Paul does not write about in any of his letters, we don't know how much of it is true and how much of it is not true. And so these are just parts of the problems with studying Paul and just trying to discern who he is that you're running into all of these issues with the documents themselves. So I want you to get that studying this is not an exact science. And it's one of the things that I want to talk about next week, which is the case for metaphysics, is that this is why metaphysics to me is so important, because if you are depending on these documents to be inerrant, if you are depending on these documents to be infallible, you are sadly mistaken. They're just not like that. For example, I don't know if I can find this quickly. I don't want to misquote it, but I think it's such a major point. I'm going to have to give it to you guys for memory, and I don't like doing that. I want to give you exact facts. If I mess it up, I'll correct myself next week. Trying to see if I can find it. Oh, John Mill. Okay. Okay, I'm not immediately finding it. With the New Testament, there are, at the time that they were doing the King James version of the New Testament, there were, I believe, something like 137 copies, meaning none of them are original, but like 2nd century, 1st century copies of whatever the original was, which we don't know, right? Those copies that were surfaced that they were working from, there were 137 like physical ones that are what they call extant, E-X-T-A-N-T, right? Which means that they've been found, they're above ground. Okay, so there were 137 copies. So in the 1700s, John Mill, who was a Bible scholar, sat down to do a scholarly translation and of those texts, and to just make note of the discrepancies, just to make note of them. He found 30,000 discrepancies between those 137 copies. I just want you to get the magnitude of that, right? So of those texts that were above ground that exists, none of them consistently agree. So when scholars are doing a translation of the New Testament or the Christian scriptures, somebody is making a decision on which version of it. So it's not just, am I translating it from the Greek into the English, or from the Greek into German, or from the Greek into whatever language. It is, which one of these fragments am I translating into the whatever language I'm translating it into. Now, since that time, since the 1700s, there are 5,000 extant documents now, meaning they're carbon dated. We know that they come from the 1st century, 2nd century. There are 5,000 that have been found in archaeological digs. So if there were 30,000 discrepancies in 137 documents, nobody even knows how many discrepancies there are now. And so this is what makes the Bible scholarship, which is why to say that it is infallible and inerrant, it's like you're scratching your head, like, do you know how this document came together? Like, is for real? So this is one of the problems that we run into with studying Paul. So anything that we are looking at with Paul, one of the things that scholars try to do is say, okay, we can barely trust Ephesians, Colossians, and Second Thessalonians because they probably were not written by Paul. 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus are a problem. We know that they were not written by Paul. Acts doesn't really agree with anything, meaning whenever Paul and Acts or Luke tell the same story, they tell it differently in meaningful and sometimes insignificant ways, right? So it's hard to trust the authenticity of Acts when it's not something that Paul is writing about, because Acts then is its only witness. Alita writes, not only that, sometimes they remove things because it didn't fit their lives, which is why the Catholic Bible has more. Yes, yes, exactly. They just move stuff around like, hey, it don't really matter. So this is one of the challenges. So when we're looking at Paul and we want to talk about who is Paul, the only documents that scholars feel like they can trust are Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, Philippians, 1 Thessalonians, and Philemon. So with that, I just want to give you a little bit. Oh, any questions? Anybody have any questions? I want to open that up. And while you guys are figuring out if you have any questions, I'll take a couple of the questions from Bright. And Ja says, actually, the discrepancies between Luke and Paul may actually indicate authenticity. Yes, that is possible. I'll share this piece with you, Ja, since you brought that up. That the reason that they go with Paul and Paul being authentic versus Luke being authentic is that Luke reshapes the story of Jesus according to the way that he wants to tell the story, meaning that you can see it when you look at if you don't read the Gospels as singular accounts, but if you read them comparatively, you can see how Luke shapes the story to fit his agenda. And so what scholars believe is that he takes that same license with the Paul story, and it's Luke that really ties the kind of Jesus and Paul message together in a way that's not that nobody else does. So this is the reason that they're thinking that Paul is probably the authentic one versus Luke being authentic or trustworthy. And you say why? Two people. That's exactly it, Ja, which is that two people telling their POV in the same situation may differ, and they're accounting for that as well. Exactly. That's exactly it. Is that you? So these are all of. It's hard to say this is exactly what happened because of what you just said. That it's a POV. Paul is telling his. Paul doesn't really ever tell his story. The closest we get to that is the letter to the Romans. Most often what you have is you have a letter that he writes to a church about something, and then we're pulling out fragments and bits and pieces from that letter to try to figure out who Paul is. So, but we're still getting his picture of who he is. So a couple of things about Paul. The first thing that you guys know about is that he has this conversion experience, that he is on the road to Damascus, and he has been a zealous persecutor of the people who support or follow Jesus. And this experience, as far as we know, happened around the year 35, which would have been 5 years after Jesus' execution. And the story in Acts is told 3 different times with minor differences of details. Once as part of the narration, and then twice in speeches that are attributed to Paul. And in this vision, one of the things that is significant is that Paul is blinded. And this is where Bart Ehrman is pointing out that in Acts, it says that Paul goes to Jerusalem after he is blinded. And, oh goodness, who is it that comes to him and touches his eyes, and he can see in something like scales? Ananias. Sorry about that. Ananias comes and touches his eyes because he's blind now for 3 days. What we don't know is whether or not this is metaphorical or whether or not it is literal. But the restoration of the sight definitely has metaphorical meaning, and it is important to Paul's story. It is important to his position for who he is. So let me take one of these questions. So Bright asks, as Saul, who is also known as Paul, was a persecutor on behalf of Jews in love of God, which was solely based on Abraham and Moses, ideologists rather than the Christ, what lesson did we learn between the 3 for love of God? Okay, I'm not sure if I fully follow your question, Bright, so I'm going to just talk it out. As Saul, who is also known as Paul, was a persecutor on behalf of the Jews in love with God, which was closely based on Abraham and Moses, ideologists rather than the Christ. What lesson did we learn between the 3 for the love of God? Bright, I'm going to have to sit with that question because I'm not sure I fully get all of what you're asking. I think that there are many lessons that come from the story. I think that it's huge that Paul, has a conversion to the very sect of Judaism that he was persecuting. I think that he must have had a serious encounter. The story in Acts puts him present at the martyrdom of Stephen, and for him to be present at the martyrdom of Stephen, it had to have been a significant event, and perhaps there was something that was said or done in that moment that was significant for his personal change. And he must have been touched for sure by these people, especially because he goes from one extreme, which is I'm out there killing these folk, to I am now one of these people. That must have been a significant thing. And I think for sure when you think about the things that have happened in our own lives where we've had dramatic makeovers like that something, that it was a deciding moment. And I don't know if it was the moment with Stephen seeing him martyred or not, but I suspect that its inclusion in the story points to its influence in Paul's decision to do something different. And also just, he had a major aha moment. I think one of the things that is important when we're looking at spiritual awakenings, our spiritual awakenings happen in a number of different ways, and each person has their own, what I call their come to Jesus moment. Paul's moment is on the road to Damascus, and meaning he's describing this. We don't know that this is a literal account, right? What we know is that he was headed somewhere, and he was on his way to do something and stopped in his tracks. When Moses tells his story, or the story is told of Moses, because Moses doesn't tell the story. When the story of Moses is told, his story is like a burning bush, and it is a bush that is burning that cannot be, that is not consumed by the fire. When Elijah's story is told, he comes out of the cave, and he's fleeing from Jezebel, and he comes out of the cave, and there's all of this thunder and lightning, and the winds are blowing, but God was not in any of that. That God was in the still small voice, or the sheer silence. So these moments when you have this awakening, it will be unique to you. I can speak to my own awakening. I can tell you that to the day, the hour of being in, it was October 2nd, so we're coming up on an anniversary here, 2009, and I was in Jacksonville, Florida, and I had traveled there to show a film. And I was still working as a film producer. And broke as a joke, and in this hotel room where I had accidentally ended up in a dusty, busty hotel, and was too broke to basically get myself out of the hotel. And I had this moment of either this stuff works or I quit. That it cannot be this amazing teaching that people like Fillmore and Johnny Coleman and Mary Baker Eddy and Emma Curtis Hopkins and Ernest Holmes and other people that I look up to, it cannot be that they have done all of this major work, told all of these stories, and it is not true. But it wasn't working for me. And it's like, okay, there's not anything wrong with me. And so if I describe that in a story, I'm describing for you that moment when it became really real for me. And someone reading it 3,000 years later, if they're taking it as infallible truth versus these are just the events that led up to her awakening, you can see the problems that we run into with Paul. So I feel like there are a lot of lessons that come off of that. I hope that answers your question. I don't know if I quite touched on your question, but I don't. There's so many lessons. Okay, you guys, it said, hold on. Okay. So the other question that you had, Bright, is, it said, as it is known that the great Apostle Paul was inspired to lead the Gentiles to the gospel, now my question is, do the name Gentiles apply both to Christian and Muslim? So as far as the Bible is concerned, the word Gentile applies to anybody that is not a Jew. So anybody. It doesn't have to be Christian and Muslim. It could be atheist. It is simply anyone who is not a Jew. And then you wrote, as Paul was a Hebrew or Jew and apostle to the Gentiles, what is the tie or relationship between Jews and Christians apart from that of being a follower of the Messiah? What is the tie or relationship between Jews and Christians apart from that of being followers of the Messiah? The tie. Okay, so I think you're asking me about early Christianity versus today, right? So in early Christianity, the tie was in terms of their observance of the law. One of the things that we will get to in the story of Paul is that before you could become a Christian or before you could follow this sect of Judaism, you had to convert to being a Jew, which means specifically you had to follow the strict dietary laws and you had to submit to circumcision. And otherwise, you could not then become part of this follower of the way, which was the name of the movement of the people who were following Jesus, even after his crucifixion. So one of the things that Paul argues is that you guys don't need to bother with circumcision and with all of these strict dietary laws. And you'll see when we get to the argument before the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish Supreme Court, that Paul argues that no, they do not have to keep the strict law in terms of diet and in terms of the circumcision. And it's a huge deal. And ultimately, at least the way the story is told in Acts, is that Peter steps up in support of Paul and helps him pass legislation that, or at least agreement, may not be official legislation, but agreement that Gentiles do not have to be circumcised and do not have to follow the same strict dietary laws. And so that act paves the way for many more Gentiles to convert to, still at this point, Judaism. They're not yet Christians, to convert to Judaism. So I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Anything else that we've talked about? Okay. A couple of other things about Paul. One of the things that we know is that he was a Roman citizen, and this is significant because it was unusual, and it also plays a part in how he dies. Now, we don't have anything in our Christian scriptures that tell us of how Paul died. What we have are documents that are written around the 1st to 2nd century that we think are pretty reliable, that basically tell us that he was killed. And because he was a Roman citizen, it would not have been okay for him to have been crucified. That was reserved for foreigners, so he would have been beheaded. One of the things that is important about Paul, and I think this is important for us in New Thought, is that Paul is a mystic. And so I just want to take a moment to really just kind of explain what it means to be a mystic. That to be a mystic means that there is no mediator between God and me. That I am not going through anyone, not even Jesus, to get to God, to get to the God presence. That I have direct access, and that I can trust the Spirit that speaks within me, and that the Spirit will interpret itself through me to me. And this is one of the things that makes Paul radical, because he comes in, he's not really teaching necessarily a Jesus message. He's teaching his version of the Jesus message. Now, as I mentioned, it's hard to say exactly what he believed because he never writes kind of a doctrinal statement. So everything that we know about him, we pull from these letters that he wrote, which were written to address things that were going on in the churches. But there are some things that consistently appear in Paul's letters. One being that Jesus is Lord. This is something that you'll see again and again and again, and I'm looking for this definition. When it appears in the in our scripture, in Greek, the word is kurios, and it has 4 meanings, and all of these meanings are relevant. One is that it's a term of respect. One that could, for example, be used to address a teacher. So this use is reflected in the Synoptic Gospels when Jesus is occasionally addressed as Lord. And I want to stress that because when we're reading today, we harmonize all these things together. Like we've been given a doctrine and then we go read the Bible. So you have to begin to start to pull back and look at what does the text actually say. And there are only occasional times when Jesus is addressed as Lord. So Paul identifying him as Lord, meaning Lord in some kind of divine sense, is a departure from how even Jesus, at least as far as we know from the Gospels, presented himself. And it's hard to see that when you're right up on the text and you've got this lens that we've been given as children, literally, and we've been told Jesus is Lord. And so when we read Lord in the Gospels, we're not even noticing that it barely occurs there. So that's one of the uses. Another the use of, or meaning for the word Lord is that it's a term used by slaves to address their master. It is a term used for gods, including the God of Israel. And in particular, in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, kurios was used as the name of God. And finally, it was also one of the titles of the Roman Emperor Caesar, is Lord. So Caesar was considered Lord. So in Paul's world, calling Jesus Lord had religious and socio-political meanings. And these two are connected in ways that we often separate today. It's, because we live in our world in America, I'm trying to think of what would be our equivalent. Because, we do have presidents of organizations, but let's suppose that we lived in a dictatorship and the head of the country was called dictator. And there arises this young star, charismatic personality that people begin to follow. And let's say that, he starts a movement, but he's ultimately, killed, right? Because he's subversive. But there are people who've been touched by his brazenness. They've been touched by the things that he taught, and they come behind him and they say, no, let's call him Sammy. Sammy is dictator. Now, Sammy's dead now, but Sammy is dictator. Sammy is dictator. So it is essentially that the Jesus idea lives on, and though Caesar is the dictator, there is this movement of people who will not let this idea die. And they continue it. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is Lord. And so Paul develops this entire theology around Jesus is Lord. And this is not a theology that you see in the Gospels. This is a theology that you see specifically in the letters of Paul. So this is huge for our understanding of Paul, that he was developing his understanding of God kind of as he went, and he was sharing it, and these letters were being written to the churches that he started to address issues that were happening in the churches. But he had this conviction, and for him, everything moved around Christ, the risen Lord. And it is Paul who uses the title Christ as if it were Jesus's last name. So you really don't see kind of the word Jesus and the word Christ together in our Gospels. But when you get to the letters of Paul, this is when you start to see Jesus Christ or Christ Jesus, or you start to see this marriage of these two words together. And so much so that even though Christ is simply the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Messiah, which simply means the anointed one, it does not necessarily have any divine connotations at all. It just simply means the anointed one. It's the one that the anointing has fallen on. So it would be like us saying, you know what, he's in the zone. He's got that it factor. We're not necessarily saying that he's divine. We're saying that he's in his element. But it is with Paul that we start to get this development of the idea of Jesus as a divine being and Jesus as the singular Son of God. All right, guys, we're at the end of our hour. Any questions? Any questions? I will leave. You can find the information on my website for the class. Any of the outlines, the outline that we're going to be following for next week. I'm going to ask if you would read. We don't have any scripture readings, but we're going to start to talk about the metaphysics for Paul and why metaphysics matters. And you want to read page 48 to page 63 in Elizabeth Sand Turner's book. And like I said, you can get the PDF at my website. And I just want to thank you. This has been an incredible ride. I'm so excited to be starting a new series. This is going to take us right through to Thanksgiving. So we will wrap the Thursday before Thanksgiving. And I just want to give thanks for you guys. I really am super appreciative. Oh, tomorrow noon, I've got a webinar. So a couple of things. I just opened a new Facebook page that is my, oh goodness, Rev Sherri James. So if you go to facebook.com/Rev Sherri James, and so you'll be able to see the webinar on there, and you'll be able to sign up. And so you can definitely enjoy that. And come see me tomorrow. I'm going to be talking to a good friend, saxophonist Mark Allen Felton, and the title of that conversation is it finally time for your passion to fund your lifestyle? Very excited. And then I see that, Judy, you have a question. You said you have a question about Jumpstart. I don't want to sign up and then not attend half of the calls because of my schedule. Will I still be able to listen to your presentations about Paul here on the Hangout? Oh, of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. And in terms of Jumpstart, the entire class is going to be recorded. So if you are not able to listen live, you can actually listen back. And for those of you that are licensed teachers and ministers in Unity, Centers for Spiritual Living, and the Universal Foundation for Better Living, I have already talked to the heads of the organizations, and the course is pre-approved for continuing education units. So you can actually use this course, not the Paul course, but the Jumpstart. That course is available for continuing education units for your teachers or your ministerial license. So thank you guys so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am super grateful for you. I'm really grateful to have this platform. I do not take it for granted, and know that I want to bring you my very best and contribute to your spiritual development. I want to see you living your best life ever, because I want to live my best life ever. So thank you. And I just release you in the love and the light of the Christ, and I affirm that the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and so it is. Have a beautiful, wonderful day. I will see you guys next Thursday. Hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow in the webinar at noon Pacific time. And you can find more information on my Facebook page. All right, take care. Bye, everybody.